An African nation, often portrayed as poor and unstable, surprised the world with a monumental feat: the construction of an entire city, with 50,000 homes, to be handed over to its people. Ibrahim Traoré shocked the world. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more videos. In a dusty, forgotten corner of the Sahel, where hope often seemed as barren as the land itself, a murmur began to spread, at first timid as the morning breeze, but gaining strength with each passing day, transforming into a wind of change that would sweep not only Burkina Faso but also the perceptions of an often skeptical world. President Ibrahim Traoré, a figure already known for his firm stance and nationalist rhetoric, was preparing to announce a project of unprecedented audacity, something that would make the entire planet turn its eyes to his nation with a mixture of incredulity and admiration. For months, teams of engineers, architects and urban planners, both local and some international experts sympathetic to the Burkinabe cause, worked in absolute secrecy, under the direct coordination of a small circle of the president's trusted confidants. The challenge was monumental: to design and begin construction of a completely new city, not for the elite or for foreign investors, but to house 50,000 of the country's most needy families, those living in precarious conditions, in overcrowded slums or displaced by conflict and relentless desertification. Initial skepticism, even within his own government, had been immense. Where would they get the resources? How would they overcome the logistical challenges in a country with limited infrastructure? Would this be yet another grand promise destined to get lost in the maze of bureaucracy and corruption, like so many others the African continent had seen before? But Traoré, with his unshakable faith in the potential of his people and an iron determination, was determined to prove the naysayers wrong, that it was possible to dream big and achieve the impossible. He had personally visited the poorest communities, smelled the smell of poverty, seen the resilient dignity in the eyes of mothers struggling to feed their children in makeshift shacks, and the frustration on the faces of young people without prospects. These images haunted him, but they also strengthened his purpose. This was not just about building homes. It was about restoring dignity, about offering a future, about proving that government was truly at the service of the most vulnerable, and not just of elites or outside interests. Financing for a project of this magnitude was undoubtedly the biggest obstacle. Burkina Faso was not a wealthy country, and traditional sources of international aid often came with conditions that Traoré considered unacceptable because they violated national sovereignty. He therefore made a controversial but ultimately crucial decision. He aggressively renegotiated mineral exploration contracts with large foreign corporations, demanding a greater share of the wealth extracted from Burkinabe soil, and channeled these new funds toward the housing project. This stance, of course, drew the ire of powerful global interests and intensified pressure on his government, but Traoré stood firm, arguing that the nation's natural resources should first and foremost benefit its own people. He also launched a nationwide resource mobilization campaign, calling on the Burkinabe diaspora and patriotically minded local entrepreneurs to contribute to what he called the construction of the collective dream, a legacy for future generations. In parallel with the search for financing, a huge logistical effort was underway. Local building materials were prioritized, not only to reduce costs but also to stimulate the local economy and create jobs. Innovative construction techniques adapted to the local climate, using compressed earth bricks and designs that promoted natural ventilation, were adopted to ensure the sustainability and comfort of future homes, harmoniously combining tradition and modernity. The site chosen for the new city, provisionally named City of Hope, or Foyer de la Dignité, Home of Dignity, was on a vast plain a few dozen kilometers from the capital, Ouagadougou, an area that would allow for planned expansion and the creation of essential infrastructure such as schools, health clinics, markets, and community spaces. The master plan called for not just housing, but a vibrant, self-sustaining community where people could live, work, and thrive. The secrecy surrounding the project was kept remarkably well, partly because of the dedication of those involved and partly because a world accustomed to other narratives about Africa simply could not conceive of something of such magnitude being undertaken in a country like Burkina Faso. While the foundations were being laid and the first walls were being built under the scorching sun, international attention was focused on other conflicts, other crises, and oblivious to the silent miracle that was taking shape. The day of the official announcement was approaching, and an air of anticipation and restrained pride hung over those in the know. Ibrahim Traoré knew that the impact would be immense, that reactions would range from skepticism to admiration, from criticism to inspiration. But he was ready. He was about to show the world that Africa was capable of great things, that visionary leadership and commitment to the people could indeed move mountains and build cities where before there had been only dust and despair. In a dusty, forgotten corner of the Sahel, where hope often seemed as barren as the land itself, a murmur began to spread, at first timid as the morning breeze, but gaining strength with each passing day, transforming into a wind of change that would sweep not only Burkina Faso but also the perceptions of an often skeptical world. President Ibrahim Traoré, a figure already known for his firm stance and nationalist rhetoric, was preparing to announce a project of unprecedented audacity, something that would make the entire planet turn its eyes to his nation with a mixture of incredulity and admiration. For months, teams of engineers, architects and urban planners, both local and some international experts sympathetic to the Burkinabe cause, worked in absolute secrecy, under the direct coordination of a small circle of the president's trusted confidants. The challenge was monumental: to design and begin construction of a completely new city, not for the elite or for foreign investors, but to house 50,000 of the country's most needy families, those living in precarious conditions, in overcrowded slums or displaced by conflict and relentless desertification. Initial skepticism, even within his own government, had been immense. Where would they get the resources? How would they overcome the logistical challenges in a country with limited infrastructure? Would this be yet another grand promise destined to get lost in the maze of bureaucracy and corruption, like so many others the African continent had seen before? But Traoré, with his unshakable faith in the potential of his people and an iron determination, was determined to prove the naysayers wrong, that it was possible to dream big and achieve the impossible. He had personally visited the poorest communities, smelled the smell of poverty, seen the resilient dignity in the eyes of mothers struggling to feed their children in makeshift shacks, and the frustration on the faces of young people without prospects. These images haunted him, but they also strengthened his purpose. This was not just about building homes. It was about restoring dignity, about offering a future, about proving that government was truly at the service of the most vulnerable, and not just of elites or outside interests. Financing for a project of this magnitude was undoubtedly the biggest obstacle. Burkina Faso was not a wealthy country, and traditional sources of international aid often came with conditions that Traoré considered unacceptable because they violated national sovereignty. He therefore made a controversial but ultimately crucial decision. He aggressively renegotiated mineral exploration contracts with large foreign corporations, demanding a greater share of the wealth extracted from Burkinabe soil, and channeled these new funds toward the housing project. This stance, of course, drew the ire of powerful global interests and intensified pressure on his government, but Traoré stood firm, arguing that the nation's natural resources should first and foremost benefit its own people. He also launched a nationwide resource mobilization campaign, calling on the Burkinabe diaspora and patriotically minded local entrepreneurs to contribute to what he called the construction of the collective dream, a legacy for future generations. In parallel with the search for financing, a huge logistical effort was underway. Local building materials were prioritized, not only to reduce costs but also to stimulate the local economy and create jobs. Innovative construction techniques adapted to the local climate, using compressed earth bricks and designs that promoted natural ventilation, were adopted to ensure the sustainability and comfort of future homes, harmoniously combining tradition and modernity. The site chosen for the new city, provisionally named City of Hope, or Foyer de la Dignité, Home of Dignity, was on a vast plain a few dozen kilometers from the capital, Ouagadougou, an area that would allow for planned expansion and the creation of essential infrastructure such as schools, health clinics, markets, and community spaces. The master plan called for not just housing, but a vibrant, self-sustaining community where people could live, work, and thrive. The secrecy surrounding the project was kept remarkably well, partly because of the dedication of those involved and partly because a world accustomed to other narratives about Africa simply could not conceive of something of such magnitude being undertaken in a country like Burkina Faso. While the foundations were being laid and the first walls were being built under the scorching sun, international attention was focused on other conflicts, other crises, and oblivious to the silent miracle that was taking shape. The day of the official announcement was approaching, and an air of anticipation and restrained pride hung over those in the know. IBRAHIM Traoré knew that the impact would be immense, that reactions would range from skepticism to admiration, from criticism to inspiration. But he was ready. He was about to show the world that Africa was capable of great things, that visionary leadership and commitment to the people could indeed move mountains and build cities where before there had been only dust and despair. The day dawned in Ouagadougou with a palpable electricity in the air, a buzz that spread through the streets like wildfire. President IBRAHIM Traoré had called a national and international press conference, announced with a certain mystery, promising a revelation that would redefine the future of Burkina Faso and inspire the continent. The local media were abuzz, speculating about what could be so grand, while foreign correspondents, initially skeptical, began to sense that something truly significant was about to happen, something beyond the usual rhetoric. On the vast esplanade in front of the presidential palace, a crowd had gathered since the early hours of the morning, people coming from all corners of the capital and even from distant villages, attracted by the promise of transformative news. Their faces were marked by the sun and the daily grind, but in them shone a spark of hope, a yearning for good news in a country that had known so many challenges, so many broken promises throughout its recent and troubled history. When President Traoré finally appeared on the podium, accompanied by his top ministers and the chief engineers of the secret project, an expectant silence fell over the crowd and the press rooms around the world that were broadcasting the event live. His figure, as always, was imposing, but that day there was a different glow in his eyes, a mixture of pride, emotion, and the seriousness of someone who carries the weight of a historic responsibility, about to hand down a legacy. People of Burkina Faso, brothers and sisters of Africa, friends of the world, Traoré began, his voice ringing out clearly and firmly, amplified by loudspeakers and carried by radio and satellite waves. Today, I do not come with words of lamentation over our hardships, nor with accusations against those who wish us harm. I come with concrete proof of the resilience, capacity, and indomitable dignity of the Burkinabe people. I come to announce the realization of a dream that many considered impossible. He paused dramatically, letting the tension build, as aerial images of a vast construction site began to be projected onto giant screens behind him, showing thousands of structures in various stages of completion, streets being laid out, the outline of a new city emerging in the middle of nowhere. The crowd held their breath, their eyes fixed on the images that seemed to come from a utopia, from a distant and unimaginable future for many of them. In recent months, Traoré continued, while some have been busy sowing discord and predicting our failure, we, the people of Burkina Faso, with our own hands, with our own resources, with our own intelligence, have been building, silently and with determination, a new city. A city with 50,000 dignified homes, which will be given, free of charge, to the neediest families in our nation, to those who have been forgotten and marginalized for so long. A roar of disbelief and jubilation exploded from the crowd, a sound wave of pure emotion that swept across the terrace and echoed through the streets of the capital. Tears streamed down aged faces, young people embraced each other, and Traoré's name was shouted as that of a savior, a leader who had finally fulfilled the promise of a better future. The news was so overwhelming, so unexpected, that many found it hard to believe it was real, fearing it was just another fleeting dream. The president then detailed the project, which had been officially named Biogo, which means future, in the local Moor language. He explained how financing had been obtained through the renegotiation of mineral contracts and the mobilization of national resources, how local labor had been prioritized, how housing had been designed to be sustainable and culturally appropriate, and how the new city would feature schools, hospitals, markets, recreational areas, and small business infrastructure, with the aim of creating a self-sufficient and thriving community. He stressed that the city of Biogo was not a gift from the government, but a right of the people, built with the sweat and wealth of the nation itself. This is not a work of charity, Traoré declared vehemently. It is an act of social justice. It is the restoration of dignity to those who have been denied it for so long. It is proof that when a people unite with a noble purpose, there is no obstacle that cannot be overcome, no dream that cannot be achieved. The international response was immediate and overwhelming. News outlets around the world interrupted their programming to cover the announcement, political analysts expressed their astonishment, and leaders from other African nations sent messages of admiration and support. On social media, the news went viral, with the hashtags #BiogoCity and #Traore shocks the world becoming global trending topics, accompanied by a mix of praise, skepticism, and intense debate about the future of development in Africa. Ibrahim Traore had indeed shocked the world, but more than that, he had lit a flame of hope that transcended borders. The initial incredulity that followed President Traore's announcement gave way to a wave of intense scrutiny by the international community and the global media, who rushed to send correspondents and experts to Burkina Faso, eager to verify with their own eyes the veracity of this monumental project. Many arrived with a considerable dose of skepticism, conditioned by decades of news about corruption, mismanagement, and failed projects on the African continent, expecting to find flaws, exaggerations, or some hidden agenda behind this grandiose promise. However, what they found when they visited the vast construction site of the city of Biogo, and interviewed the engineers, workers, and future residents, gradually began to dispel their doubts, replacing them with grudging respect and, in many cases, genuine admiration. The aerial images did not lie. Thousands of houses, in different stages of construction, stretched as far as the eye could see, forming the skeleton of a city that was being born from the dust with impressive speed and organization, a testament to human ingenuity. Local workers, many of whom were previously unemployed or underemployed, spoke with palpable pride about their part in building Biogo, about the city's future. As news of Biogo City reverberated around the globe, generating waves of admiration and, in some circles, undisguised bewilderment, in Burkina Faso the popular excitement was turning into a fervor of celebration and anticipation. The promise of 50,000 decent homes for the neediest families was not just an impressive statistic. It was the realization of a dream, the opportunity to learn new skills and to contribute to a project that not only gave them a livelihood but also a sense of purpose and belonging to something bigger. Their personal stories of struggle and collective hope were tangible proof that change was possible, and that the future could indeed be different from the past of deprivation and uncertainty. In the days following the announcement, caravans of curious and hopeful citizens began to head towards the vast construction site, giving a human face to the magnitude of the work, touching the sensibilities of the most cynical journalists. And the city of Biogo, wanting to see for themselves the miracle that was taking shape. What they found was a hive of frenetic and organized activity. Thousands of workers, men and women, mostly Burkinabe, development and urban planning specialists, initially cautious, began to recognize the clever planning behind Biogo. The use of local materials and sustainable construction techniques, the prioritization of green spaces and the use of machinery, the laying of bricks, the installation of roofs, the painting of walls, all imbued with a sense of community infrastructure, and the focus on creating a local economy integrated into the city were seen as innovative and promising approaches that could serve as models for other housing projects in similar contexts, challenging paradigms and creating a sense of purpose and pride that was contagious. The government, under the direct leadership of President Traore, established a transparent and rigorous process for selecting the families that would benefit from the new housing. Traditional foreign aid schemes. Critics, of course, did not disappear entirely. Some questioned the long-term financial sustainability of the project, especially in terms of maintaining infrastructure and public services in the new city. Other local Levantites, made up of community leaders, social workers and civil society representatives, were tasked with identifying the most urgent cases, prioritizing families with many children, the elderly, people with disabilities and those who had concerns about transparency in the allocation of resources and the selection of beneficiary families. Fearing that they would be in extremely vulnerable conditions, such as those internally displaced by conflict or natural disasters. The construction of the city of Biogo went far beyond the simple construction of houses. The urban plan provided for wide avenues of trees, clientelism, or the exclusion of vulnerable groups. And there were those who, driven by geopolitical interests, saw in Biogo a dangerous demonstration of autonomy and a challenge to the influence of international financial institutions. President Traore and his government have faced these criticisms with a mix of transparency and firmness. They have opened the project's books to independent audits, invited civil society organizations to monitor the selection process for future residents, and even set up small workshops and business incubator spaces to foster local commerce, ensuring that future residents have not only a roof over their heads, but also opportunities for employment, education, and access to essential services, regardless of their ethnicity, religion, or political affiliation. As for outside critics, TRAORE responded that the project also incorporated principles of environmental sustainability. The houses were built with local materials, such as earth bricks, and the best response would be the success of the project and the well-being of its people. The Biogo building was equipped with lathes, which provided excellent thermal insulation, reducing the need for air conditioning. Rainwater harvesting systems were installed, and the landscape planning included the planting of natural trees and the creation of new homes. Leaders from other African countries visited the construction site, seeking inspiration and knowledge to combat desertification and create a milder microclimate. There was also a focus on renewable energy, with solar panels installed on public buildings and incentives for their use in the homes to replicate the initiative in their own contexts. International organizations that had previously viewed TRAORE with suspicion began to build the houses. The international community, initially taken by surprise, began to react in different ways. Some recognized the importance of their achievement and offered technical support and partnerships, realizing that something impressive was actually happening. Nations and humanitarian organizations offered technical and financial support to complement the efforts of the Burkinabe government. The most profound impact, however, was felt in the hearts of the Burkinabe people, who were drawn by the scale and vision of the project. Others, however, especially those whose interests had been undermined by TRAORE's nationalist policies, maintained a thinly veiled skepticism, raising questions about the long-term financial sustainability and manageability of such a large city. President TRAORE, aware of these criticisms, responded with facts and unshakable confidence. He emphasized that the process, although rigorous, was perceived as fair, and the expectation of being one of those chosen was becoming a driving force for dreams and planning for thousands of families. The City of Hope was no longer just a part of the financing that came from national resources, and that the project was generating thousands of jobs, boosting the economy, an architectural project to become a catalyst for social and psychological change. It represented the breaking of a local cycle and reducing dependence on imported construction materials. Furthermore, it argued that the social cost of hopelessness, the affirmation of human dignity, and the proof that, even in the most difficult circumstances, that of doing nothing, of leaving millions of people living in misery, would be infinitely greater than the investment in the city. Visionary leadership and collective will can create oases of prosperity and well-being, where before Biogo, construction progressed at an impressive pace, a testament to the organization's capacity and dedication. There was only the desert of neglect and exclusion. IBRAHIM TRAORE, observing the progress of the dedication of Burkinabe workers. Each week, new blocks were completed, new streets were built, and Biogo felt a mixture of exhaustion and deep satisfaction when he saw the impact he was making. There was form, and the vision of a vibrant city full of life began to materialize before the eyes. Of the journey had been arduous, full of obstacles and moments of doubt, but the vision of seeing families perform a nation that followed each progress with its heart in hand, as if it were witnessing the birth of its own prodigal son. The psychological impact of the project on the population was immeasurable. The city of Biogo, with its few belongings relocated to new, safe homes, children running through clean, tree-lined streets, and communities forming on the basis of solidarity and hope, was the greatest reward he could have hoped for, a powerful symbol of hope, of national self-esteem, and of the ability of the African people to find their own solutions to their problems. It challenged the persistent narrative of a continent doomed to poverty and dependence, showing that with visionary leadership, political will, and the mobilization of its own resources, Africa could indeed build its own future, a future of dignity and prosperity. As the world watched, IBRAHIM TRAORE did not rest. He regularly visited the construction site, talking to the engineers, encouraging the workers, inspecting the quality of the construction, and above all, reaffirming his commitment that the city of Biogo would be a model of inclusive and sustainable development, a beacon of hope not only for Burkina Faso, but for all nations struggling for social justice and a place in the sun. News of the city of Biogo, with its promised 50,000 homes, not only captured the imagination of the Burkinabe people, but also sent shockwaves through foreign ministries and global power centers, forcing a rethink of narratives and policies toward Africa. Leaders of neighboring nations, facing similar challenges of rapid urbanization, housing shortages, and persistent poverty, viewed TRAORE's initiative with a mixture of admiration, envy, and a certain trepidation, as it set a new standard of expectation for their own populations. Delegations from several African countries began visiting Burkina Faso, not just to see the Biogo construction site, but to learn from the Burkinabe experience, to understand how a country with limited resources and so many security challenges had managed to mobilize the means and political will for such a large-scale project. The discussions went beyond engineering and architecture, addressing topics such as renegotiating natural resource contracts, mobilizing domestic financing, and creating a sense of national purpose around a common goal. International financial institutions and development agencies, which had previously maintained a critical distance from TRAORE's government due to its nationalist policies, were forced to recognize Biogo's impact and importance. Some, more pragmatic, began offering technical support and discussing possible partnerships for the second phase of the project, which would involve expanding the new city's social and economic infrastructure, such as the creation of light industrial parks and advanced vocational training centers. However, not all reactions were positive. Certain circles of power in the West, whose economic interests had been directly affected by TRAORE's policies, stepped up their criticism, questioning the sustainability of the project and raising the specter of debt and mismanagement. There was a hidden fear that the Biogo example could inspire other resource-rich nations to adopt similar stances of renegotiating contracts and prioritizing national development, which could shake up economic power structures that had been established for decades. The international media, although initially focused on the surprising aspect of the news, began to deepen their analyses, some highlighting Biogo as a model of South-led development, while others, more skeptical, continued to look for flaws or hidden agendas. The debate over the Burkinabe miracle became a recurring theme at conferences on development, urbanism, and international relations, with Biogo serving as a case study for the possibilities and challenges of large-scale transformative projects on the African continent. President Traore, aware of the complexity of these reactions, maintained an open stance towards dialogue, but without compromising his principles. He welcomed technical support and genuine cooperation, but rejected any attempt to impose conditionalities that would compromise Burkina Faso's sovereignty or the social objectives of the Biogo project. His message was clear: the new city was a national project, financed primarily with national resources, and its success would be measured by the well-being of its people, not by the approval of creditors or foreign powers. Within the African Union and other regional forums, TRAORE's initiative sparked intense debate on the need for greater South-South cooperation and the search for indigenous development models that were less dependent on foreign aid and more focused on mobilizing the continent's vast human and natural resources. Biogo became a symbol of Pan-African pride, proof that Africa could indeed surprise the world with its capacity for innovation and achievement. The impact of the project was also felt in Burkina Faso's relations with its immediate neighbors in the Sahel region, many of which were facing humanitarian crises due to conflict and internal displacement. The possibility that Biogo could in the future house not only Burkinabe citizens but also refugees from the region began to be quietly discussed, although Traore stressed that the initial priority was to meet the needs of his own people, who were already carrying a heavy burden. The construction of Biogo City thus went far beyond the question of housing. It had become a catalyst for geopolitical debate, a test case for North-South relations, a beacon of hope for the dispossessed, and a powerful symbol of the ability of a visionary leader and a determined people to rewrite their own history, defying expectations and inspiring an entire continent to dream of a future of dignity and self-determination. As the first families prepared to receive the keys to their new homes in Biogo, the world watched with renewed attention. The Burkinabe experiment was in full swing, and its outcome could have lasting implications for the future of development, governance, and sovereignty in Africa and beyond. Ibrahim Traore had not just built a city, he had made a powerful case for African hope and agency on the global stage. As the date for the official inauguration of the city of Biogo and the handover of the first keys approached, a wave of excitement and anticipation swept across Burkina Faso, culminating in a popular fervor rarely seen in the country's history. The project, which had begun as an audacious dream in the corridors of power and on dusty construction sites, was about to become a tangible reality for thousands of families, transforming not only their living conditions but also their prospects for the future, and their sense of belonging to a nation that finally seemed to care about the most forgotten. Preparations for the inauguration ceremony were intense, involving not only the completion of the first housing units and basic infrastructure, but also the organization of an event that would adequately celebrate the magnitude of this historic achievement. President Traoré insisted that the ceremony be inclusive, reflecting the spirit of the project, not a parade of dignitaries, but a popular celebration, where the real protagonists would be the future residents of the city of Biogo, those for whom it had all been built. Invitations were sent to leaders of other African nations, to representatives of international organizations who had shown genuine support, and to prominent figures in the fight for social justice and sustainable development around the world. However, the main focus was to ensure the massive participation of the Burkinabe people, with transportation being organized from various parts of the country so that they could witness this moment of national pride and share in the joy of the families who benefited. The selection of the first families to receive the keys followed strict and transparent criteria, prioritizing the most vulnerable, but also seeking to represent the diversity of the country. There were widows with many children, elderly people who had lost everything, young couples starting out in life with no prospect of decent housing, and people with disabilities who faced daily barriers to a minimally comfortable existence. For each of these families, the news that they would be given a home in Biogo was like a rebirth, the promise of a new beginning. In the days leading up to the inauguration, local and international media intensified their coverage, reporting moving stories of the future residents, their tears of gratitude, their dreams for the future in their new homes, and the renewed hope that Biogo represented. These human narratives gave an even deeper dimension to the project, showing that it was not just about bricks and mortar, but about lives transformed, dignity restored, and communities being built on foundations of solidarity and opportunity. The day of the inauguration dawned with a blue sky and a radiant sun, as if nature itself wanted to bless this historic moment. A huge crowd, coming from all corners of Burkina Faso, gathered in the central square of the city of Biogo, a large, tree-lined space surrounded by the first houses ever completed, painted in vibrant colors that reflected the joy and hope of the moment. National flags fluttered in the wind, and traditional songs echoed, celebrating the culture and resilience of the Burkinabe people. President IBRAHIM Traoré arrived accompanied not by a conspicuous guard, but by a group of children, future residents of Biogo, who held his hand with a mixture of shyness and admiration. His speech was brief but charged with emotion. He spoke less like a head of state and more like a proud father celebrating his children's achievement. He thanked everyone who made Biogo's dream a reality, from the engineers and workers to the ordinary citizens who contributed what they could. Today, Traoré declared, his voice breaking, we are not just inaugurating houses. We are inaugurating a new era of hope and dignity for Burkina Faso. We are proving to the world, and more importantly to ourselves, that we are capable of great things when we are united by a noble purpose. Biogo is proof that the future is not something to be waited for, but something to be built, with courage, hard work and love for our land and our people. The most moving moment of the ceremony was the symbolic handover of the first keys. The president called some of the selected families to the stage, representing different profiles of vulnerability. As he handed over the keys, he embraced each head of family, sharing their tears of joy and smiles of gratitude. These were scenes of profound humanity, which transcended politics and touched the hearts of everyone present and those watching on television around the world. After the official ceremony, the streets of Biogo were filled with life. Families began to move into their new homes, carrying their few belongings but with hearts full of hope. Children ran through the newly paved streets, exploring their new surroundings with the curiosity and joy that befits their age. Neighbors got to know each other, shared improvised meals, and began to weave the bonds of a new community, a community born under the sign of solidarity and new beginnings. Biogo City, once an audacious project on paper, had become a vibrant reality, a testament to what can be achieved when political leadership aligns with the deepest aspirations of its people. The impact of that day would reach far beyond the borders of Burkina Faso, inspiring other nations to dream of their own Biogos, and reaffirming the belief that a more just and dignified future is possible for all, if there is the courage to challenge the impossible and the determination to turn dreams into reality. The inauguration of Biogo City and the delivery of the first 50,000 homes marked a turning point not only for Burkina Faso, but for the global perception of the potential for homegrown development in Africa. President Ibrahim Traoré, far from being content with the initial success, saw this moment as the beginning of an even greater journey, the first phase of a national transformation project that aimed not only to provide housing, but also to create sustainable economic opportunities, strengthen the social fabric and consolidate the country's sovereignty in all its dimensions. In the months and years that followed, the city of Biogo continued to grow and develop, not only in terms of new housing units, but also in terms of creating a robust social and economic infrastructure. Quality schools were established, attracting dedicated teachers and offering a curriculum that valued both universal knowledge and local culture. Well-equipped health clinics staffed by qualified professionals began to serve the population, reducing infant mortality rates and improving the overall health of the community, which had previously suffered from lack of access. Small businesses began to flourish in Biogo, fueled by microcredit programs and a growing consumer market. Craft workshops, bakeries, tailors, grocers, and local service providers filled the streets with a vibrant activity, generating jobs and income for residents. Agricultural cooperatives were formed on the outskirts of the city, using sustainable farming techniques to produce food for the community and the capital's market, strengthening the country's food security. Traoré's government invested heavily in the vocational training of Biogo's young people, creating training centers in areas such as construction, renewable energy, information technology, and sustainable tourism. The aim was to train the new generation not only for existing jobs but also for the professions of the future, ensuring that the city was not just a dormitory but a hub of innovation and economic development, capable of retaining its talent and attracting new investment. Cultural life in Biogo also flourished. Community spaces hosted festivals of traditional music and dance, screenings of African films, debates on topics relevant to the community, and sports activities for all ages. The diverse ethnicities and cultures of Burkina Faso met and mixed in Biogo, creating an environment of tolerance, mutual respect, and a shared civic identity based on the values of solidarity and collective construction that marked the city's birth. Biogo's success began to attract the attention of international investors, but this time, negotiations were conducted on very different terms. The Traoré government, strengthened by its demonstrated ability to deliver, demanded that any foreign investment be aligned with national development objectives, generate quality jobs for Burkinabes, transfer technology, and respect the country's environmental and labor laws. The era of unbridled exploitation was over. Other African nations, inspired by the example of Burkina Faso, began to implement their own Biogo projects, adapted to their local realities but sharing the same spirit of sovereignty, social justice, and domestically led development. The exchange of experiences and South-South cooperation intensified, creating a new dynamic of solidarity and mutual learning on the continent, which was beginning to free itself from the shackles of dependence and forge its own path towards prosperity. President Ibrahim Traoré, while continuing to face internal challenges and external pressures, saw his legacy cemented not only in the walls of Biogo's homes, but in the smiles of children who now had a future, in the dignity of workers who were building their own country, and in the pride of a nation that had rediscovered its strength and its ability to dream. Biogo was more than a city. It was living proof that hope, when accompanied by action and visionary leadership, can transform deserts into oases. The story of the city of Biogo has become a modern legend, told and retold across the continent and beyond, a beacon of hope for the oppressed and a reminder to the powerful that true development is that which places the human being at its center, which values dignity, and which seeks social justice above all else. And at the heart of this legend was the figure of Ibrahim Traoré, the leader who dared to dream the impossible and who, with the strength of his people, shocked the world by transforming that dream into a reality that would inspire generations. Biogo's ultimate impact was yet to be fully understood, but one thing was certain. Burkina Faso had shown the world that another path was possible, a path of sovereignty, dignity, and hope built with one's own hands. And this powerful and transformative message would echo for a long time, challenging old certainties and opening new possibilities for a future where development was truly for all, not just for the privileged few. And so we conclude this inspiring narrative about the city of Biogo and the visionary leadership of President Ibrahim Traore. A story that reminds us of the power of bold dreams and the human capacity to overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges when there is unity, determination, and a genuine commitment to collective well-being. If this journey of hope and fulfillment touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe to our channel. Your like is very important to us, and your comments enrich our community. Tell us what impressed you most about this story or what lessons we can learn from Biogo's example. We are immensely grateful for your audience, and we hope to continue sharing stories that inspire, move, and make us believe in a better future, built by all of us.